Welcome to After Further Consideration, a DEI-focused podcast brought to you by Enrollify and Element 451. I'm Dr. Cody Nielsen, Executive Director of Convergent Strategies and Higher Education faculty member.
And I'm Dr. Tomika Ferguson, Assistant Dean for Student Affairs and Inclusive Excellence, and an Assistant Professor at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Education. We're sitting down with seasoned change leaders for candid chats about responsive leadership, addressing campus crises, navigating institutional shifts, and fostering sustainable change, all through the lens of equity and inclusion.
Join us every other Tuesday to learn about these leaders' real-life challenges, lessons learned, and the innovative solutions they develop to tackle these complex issues.
Our goal is to help you drive positive and inclusive change on your campus.
After Further Consideration is a part of the Enrollify Network, a community of innovators, thinkers, and doers dedicated to revolutionizing higher education. Learn new skills, find your next big idea, and network with the industry's best minds at enrollify.org.
Enrollify is presented by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.
Welcome to today's episode of After Further Consideration. Today, Tomika and I are going to be discussing shared leadership and transformational leadership. We're going to jump right in with just the two of us today. It just so happens that this morning is the day after the election and a perfect day for us to talk about the intersections of DEI and leadership and where we go from here. So we've decided for today that we're going to focus on work that we do collectively with our panelists and our guests, also thinking about what we do as professionals. And so we're going to start this morning, and I'm just going to say, how are you, Tomika? And how are you holding up this morning?
Today is interesting because I strive to maintain peace. And as a person who is eternally optimistic, it is hard for me not to be today. But I'm feeling this nuance, this coexistence of a myriad of emotions that I'm trying to still maintain some hope. So how I'm doing today is I am undaunted, but I am frustrated. I am actually coping with the fact that I'm not shocked about some things that have happened as our election has unfolded. But at the same time, I am taking the time to center myself, because to do the work that we do requires a certain level of self-control, sustained commitment, an attitude and a focus on optimism and hope. But it does not mean that it cannot coexist with other emotions and other priorities. And so as we've talked to so many leaders this year, Cody, it makes me think this is where the walking of this work that we are committed to doing happens. So today I'm in between, I'm in this betwixt state, but I have not lost hope. And I am proud of myself for that. But how are you doing this morning?
Undaunted but frustrated. As a white, straight, cishet individual of at least moderate socioeconomic status, the privileges that I hold in my body are unbelievable in comparison to so many of the folks that I do this work with. I don't see enough folks that carry all of or many of the identities that I hold being really involved in the DEI work. And that's going to be a conversation that I'm going to want to have as things unfold about what has gone wrong and where we continue to fail. I remember very clearly SNL skit in the days after the 2016 election when Key and Peele and Chris Rock were sort of guests, and they did this sort of like white people in an apartment sort of like watching the fallout of 2016. And I would encourage people to go back and watch this skit and watching white folks like just be flabbergasted at the election results. And I think about when you say undaunted but frustrated. I think my body was fully prepared for this to happen again. And I think as I have become more and more steeped in the work, I become more and more clear that the work continues always. Yesterday, somebody said to me, they said, remember, every day is an election if you count it in your bodily moves, in your actions, and what comes from this. And I think what I'm feeling this morning is a sense of understanding the commitment to this work, understanding the work of resistance, and understanding the work that whatever happens in one election doesn't mean that things stop. And that rather the other way, that the way in which I view it nowadays in the body that I feel like I've been privileged to hold, but also in the work that I've continued to lean into, is that you can have hope and you also can understand how serious the work is in front of us. And I think that's where I'm sitting this morning. And I think if we were to analyze this, and when this all comes to light, we will be reminded again and again how important the work is together and how important the work is continuously.
There are these elements to leading where when we think about a national election, that's not just what we're talking about. We're talking about state elections. We're talking about local referendums. We're talking about a constitutional right. We're talking about, the right to vote not happening for every American until less than 40 years ago. There's this desire for us to want to say that America always has been, but diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, belonging, justice, all of these words have come into existence because of the turmoil and the stress and the complexity and the anger and the hate and the harm and the hurt. These things have coexisted with America. They have, and it has hit higher ed because higher ed is a reflection of our country. It's a reflection of ideals and hopes, of ideologies, the considerations of them, how we interrogate them. It is also a tool to teach identity and to understand our country and to critique it, right? And so I say that, which is complex, because we can't isolate this moment to one decision and one vote and one individual. It is so multi-layered. I think that's one of my frustrations when it comes to doing equity work. The nuance is really, really difficult. It's okay for us to be intersectional, but it is not always okay for us to be nuanced in our work. And that's one of the things that I started reflecting on this morning just to prepare for our conversation. And what I came to was there's this need to start talking about how we do our work. How do we approach our work? How are we doing this work? And for me, I started thinking about leadership styles. I started thinking about this need to pause for a moment and to slow down. And it's not just about listening to the narratives of leaders who have been through the fire, who have done this work and learning from them. It's also having a moment just with you and for those listening, for us to pause for a second and say, how are we really, truly approaching this hard work that we're doing? How are we situating ourselves, not just politically, but just in community with people? How are we evaluating the people who we lead with? Like, so those beside us, our followers, those who are listening to us and paying attention to us. Because if there is nuance, it means that not everybody is going to like us, but it doesn't mean that they are not expected to work with us, and that to do our work and our vision as leaders, that we don't need them and need their skill sets and need what they're bringing to the table to hit our end goal, which is an equitable and just society, a space where everyone can participate without restriction. And right now, there's a lot of people that feel that all we have is restriction, and that there's fear of more to come. And I don't think that that is, a far stretched truth, but it does require us to slow down for a second and just ask ourselves, how are we really doing this work? How are we approaching the work to be focused on meeting the needs and creating resources and making space and providing support for everyone to thrive, and not create a space where it's just constant resistance and friction and harm? How can we do this work in higher ed and recruit well and lead well and educate well? How can we do this work when we have to be in community with people that might not be all in, and we're expecting and thinking in our minds that they are fully committed to the same exact thing in the same exact way?
You know, I often talk with folks, and part of the reason I love working in education, I love working with K-12 educators. I love working in and around higher education, and really grateful for the opportunities as an educator and as a scholar activist and practitioner scholar, all of these sort of things. And I often have people say, why? And I tell people, higher education to me is the first and last battleground. It has been the first and last battleground for social issues throughout history, our history of understanding why tenure exists, our history of understanding social movements like the Black sit-in movement, like the fight for civil rights on college campuses and the Freedom Riders, and what we see in the late John Lewis, and all of those that fought for something, and how so much of it began on college campuses. And I think about what you are saying today, and I have been saying for a while that my fear is that in our movements around social issues, that we are straddling between wherein we follow sort of old Alinsky level organizing methods, where we simply take those that agree with us and we just blaze the trail and just kind of say, screw everybody else. We are going to reach the tipping point with ourselves. And I have seen that in conversations around race. I've seen that in conversations around sexuality. I've seen that around conversations around women's bodily autonomy. And to me, it is the continuous cycle that in anger and in frustration that we have held. And that is, take those that are in agreement with us already, just literally move the needle through that. And while I have said over and over that those moments that Alinsky level organizing held in the 1960s were deeply impactful and perhaps at moments were exactly what we needed, the 21st century has led us into an other side of this binary construct. And that is this sort of social harmony where we focus not on equity, but on diversity. And if we have listened to anything, and if I've heard anything in these 8 months of this sort of heart of this campaign, and what I continuously hear in folks that are nervous about DEI work and nervous about leadership of DEI, it is that we are worried that equity-based work is creating a cataclysmic sort of chasm between us. And we are so focused on equity that we are no longer focused on each other and like the nuance between each other. And so people are sort of saying, oh, well, this is a threat because we make people like hate the color of their skin, and they don't want to show up like because they don't feel like they have a place in this movement. And that my fear is that what is heard is that we have then focused on this sort of diversity and pluralism that is really about syncretism. And somewhere in the middle is exactly, I think, what you're talking about. This sustained commitment toward being in spaces together and expecting people not to always agree with us, but to continue to show up, and that we are working collectively to move the needle. And that means that sometimes people aren't as far along when it comes to certain social issues than others, but we are not leaving them at the train station and blowing by them. And that doesn't mean that the role for everyone is to do that. There are people at different stages, but I think we are leaving certain people out of the conversation, and it is causing them to feel disenfranchised and causing them to latch on to other sort of narratives that have come out in this sort of anti-DEI, anti-leadership, anti-progress movement. And I will be very interested to looking at exit polls. And I will be very interested to see what the next 6 to 12 months look like on college campuses, because I think the conversation might need to be honest and forthright, that people are being left out of our equity conversations, and that our leadership style has not actually approached people with grace and understanding that people are not all at the same place, but simply not giving people space to actually show up in their full authentic selves.
That's why I use the word nuance. That's why I'm bringing up words like community. It's bringing me back to Ubuntu, right? Like, I am because we are.
Yes.
The sense of humanity, and there is this challenge in not understanding that how we approach the work and what our leadership styles are influences our outcomes, influences how the work is done. And one of the things I have enjoyed about being in community with you and in community with people like Kevin McDonald and Chris Wren and, Gatan Jean Marie, is that we have talked to some very powerful leaders, Charlie Nelms, that have reached this stage of focusing on the people and having a critical reflection of, when I'm engaging in this very hard work, when I am doing work that I'm putting my career and my reputation and the location of my family and my financial livelihood on, kind of like, it's there, it's coupled with it, like, this is a part of these consequences, that I have to sit down and think not just about myself, but I still have to think about the humanity. I still have to think about the people. I still have to think about the community. And this morning, it had me just thinking about words like transformational and transitional leadership. It had me thinking about, what do we mean when we say that we are a leader? What descriptors do we have? And then what are the actions? What are the behaviors that we have? Now, as a leadership scholar, and someone who teaches literally in a leadership program, I have never believed in a singular approach to leadership. I think our leadership is going to be intersectional. It will have these influences of our own identity. As for me as a Black woman, that will filter every leadership style and approach and decision that I make. But it makes me think about, what are the behaviors that I'm exemplifying when I'm doing the work with people to have this collective and communal approach to where I am centering humanity. And that makes me think about, when we talked to Gatan, right? She talked about the humanity. When we talked with, earlier folks, just thinking about doing things for the people and focusing on their development, it makes me think about transformative leadership, in that to do equity work, where we're not using the acronym DEI, when we're doing equity work, when we're doing work that's focused on justice, when we're doing work that's also ethical, we have to have an understanding of what we're actually doing. What is it that we are disrupting? Are we just doing something that's transactional, where we hit the outcome and we move on and relationships aren't required? Or are we trying to be transformational, where we're empowering people, where we're moving people along, where we're inspiring them? But there also has to be this transformative power as well, where we understand the end goal is disruption, that we are fully race conscious, that we are conscious of the fact that we are different, that my race matters. There is no colorblind society, and colorblind approaches fail anything related to diversity, inclusion, and equity, and justice, and belonging, and accessibility. If we don't disrupt these systemic issues, then our leadership approaches really are failing the work that we're doing. We're inherently creating barriers, and we are definitely not focused on humanity and the people. And the people are not just the ones who benefit from the outcomes that we have. So I think about this in a higher ed context. Um, some folks only focus on, will this policy decision or this course benefit our students upon graduation? I also want to think about the labor of the faculty member who has to put together the syllabus and manage the conversations that are happening simultaneously, and the
Mm-hmm.
labor that it takes to have a classroom in that way. Or how about the president who has to lead a liberal or liberal leaning or public facing institution in an area that is incongruent with the values and the mission of the institution? Like, what about that town in that area where there's constant conflict? And so people feel like they're in a bubble on campus and unsafe when they're not on the grounds. And so it makes me think, how are we doing this work? What conversations are we having? How are we building consensus? And so it makes me encouraged that focus on developmental constructs in our leadership approaches is something that we have to pay attention to, and not just the language and the goals that we are working towards, not just the things that we put on a banner and that we post on social media. We have to slow it all the way down. And that's something that you said to me when we were preparing for this morning. And so it makes me think, what conversations are we having to ensure that we have organizational readiness? Let's go back to the organizational culture. Is everybody who is doing this work with us ready? Are they
Mm-hmm.
prepared? Do they have the sustained commitment that a lot of us are advocating for? And if not, what is the work that has to happen in the silos and in our individual and collective relationships to get on the same page? And again, it is not full agreement. Rather, it is, how can we just ensure that everybody knows how to say where we're going? They know the direction. They know their responsibility. And do they have the ability to be their full selves in doing the work? Because
Yeah.
sometimes co-conspirators and allies do not look like us, and they do not talk like us. They do not approach leadership like us. And so my frustration is that if we're only focused on the outcomes and we forget the how, that no matter what happens, no matter what decisions and policies and leadership changes will happen, not just across our country, but within our circles of influence, we will not be able to have sustained impact and sustainable change, because we are so focused on the development of the individual and the focus of the measures of the outcomes. I think we do have to take a collective breath and look around us at our circles of influence. Who are we doing this with?
Mm-hmm.
How are we having these collective approaches? How do we disrupt the silence within our own way of doing this work? We can't do work to unsilence people while silencing people.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
is, and I think you pointed that out in your earlier comment, that, we really have to pay attention to the voices.
Oh. All of this is I just can't disagree with anything that you're saying in terms of this. And yeah, I did say before we got on this podcast today that I felt like it was really about, we're going to have to slow down and do some serious examination, how we got here, how we are here, and it's not even that we got here. It's just that this is the pulse check. If we want to go back to the enroll, our original 5 episode, this is the pulse check on the country. When you take a vote, you begin to understand where people's values are and where we are in this moment. And I do think from our leadership style, we have been very quick to silence those who are not on the same page as us. And not even that those aren't on the same page, but they're not at the same point on the page, the same spot that we I've had hard conversations in my career recently with folks. And again, as a white, straight, cishet man, like, it's always hard to have certain conversations, especially when you when so many of these work, so much of the work that I see us doing is with folks, BIPOC folks, to have the conversation that say, is it possible that we are inadvertently creating harm on the folks that we are looking at, who we don't believe can be co-conspirators and allies, like you say, but they are, that are still finding their voice, still finding their space, and frankly are desperate to show up, but to show up in a way that actually is reducing harm and actually helping. And we look past them because we expect that they're not ready, or we expect that they can't possibly experience the world and see the world in a way which we want, and we expect people to show up at this point. There's going to be a lot of people, I think, out of this election that are going to say, we are in 2024. What year are we in to watch people do this? And I actually think that's one of the most fragile statements that we could make that can create harm. We are in 2024. We are also in 1876 at the end of Reconstruction. We are everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And we are facing the consequences of realizing that we are going backwards. And maybe we're just going backwards because we are failing to understand how much exactly what you're talking about. We're going backwards because we've started to become outcome driven and not relationship driven. We see that relationship break down in our society. Psychology has told us that we're not good at talking with each other. People are struggling with, social relationships. We're more isolated and lonely. And maybe that's just a data marker on a larger conversation about how we don't have effective conversations and discourse anymore.
Yes. I really liked how you said we are everywhere and nowhere at the same time, right? One thing that I meant when I brought up that, we can be creating and silencing people, and that the folks who might not look like us or think like us could be, allies and co-conspirators. This is based upon some recent conversations I've had. It's conference season, higher ed. So you're interrogating everything when you see your folks and get together with them to just interrogate where we are socially and politically and, education based. One of the things that has come to me is that the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, justice, and belonging. I am going to take on the banner of what we were encouraged to do at the past NADAHE conference. I don't know if you remember this, when Paulette Granberry Russell, the president of NADAHE, got on stage. She really challenged us to talk about this work, and to talk about this work not in an acronym.
Yeah.
And I feel as though the power in the acronym is influencing conflicting ideologies that have people forgetting what we're talking about. So I think that's a part of our leadership style, right? One thing about being a transformational or transformative or a social justice leader, and I'm using these terms because folks love to rally around these terminologies. Go back to the root of the things that you're claiming. Is everybody who you're working with understanding what you're doing and what you're working to dismantle and the oppressions that you're challenging? Have we gone back and looked at our foundation to ensure that we are grounded on the right concepts? And so to not say DEI, but to say the words means that some approaches, some equity problems, some inclusion challenges, some leadership issues, some policies that need to be made are not DEI approaches. They are approaches that are requiring or focus more on accessibility, which leads to justice, that requires equity. And each of these things, while similar and parallel and synonymous, are not always the same thing in every context. So that's one of the things that I would really implore for those listening to us to kind of sit with, like, what is it that you're actually doing? What is it that you're actually saying? What is it that you're actually working to dismantle or disrupt? What is it that you're actually looking to accomplish? What needs to be sustainable? What needs to be short term? What needs to be something that you completely eradicate? What needs to be deconstructed, reconstructed? What needs to be created and implemented? I think we have to ensure that we are clear on what we're doing because of the potential of decisions and policies and laws and ethical challenges that we are anticipating in this space that we're in. We have to be grounded in the right stuff. We have to be affirmed in the right stuff to make sure, like you said, that we are not everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Our location has to be clear and central. And it's not just the locus of control. And it's not just like how people say, this is my center today. It's a lot more than that because it has to be collective.
Yep.
So when we slow down and have these conversations and we reiterate that despite what happens around us, this work will persist with or without us. It persisted under Jim Crow. It persisted under Brown v. Board of Education 1 and 2. It persisted through Civil Rights Acts, plural. It persisted through the Voting Rights Act. It has persisted, despite even, Reconstruction. We will find a way to persist.
Yes.
We are not at a space where we should be without hope. But it doesn't mean that we don't have to do an examination and slow down and do and have a moment of dissonance, right? We are in a disharmonious space right now. And we cannot allow that lack of harmony to be disruptive to the work that has to be done. Rather, we can't be utopian. We have to be focused. Ubuntu, okay? I am because we are. Where is our center? Where is our humanity in this? And this work would not fall on the shoulders of the marginalized and the minoritized if it will be done. Our leaders of color, our minoritized and marginalized leaders cannot face the brunt. Hence the communal approaches. Hence the fact that we have to check ourselves just a little bit individually, but even more so now collectively. Do we know where we're going and why? Do we know what we're working on and why? So, it's not just saying I'm a transformational leader. I think about LinkedIn post and descriptions when I'm thinking about that. That's just not it. What do you mean? What is the evidence in your decision making and in your leadership and in your behaviors and your communication? You can't bully and say that you're transformative, right? You can't have power and a seat at the table to eradicate stuff and be silent and say that you're equity leader. You can't do that. This is not the season and the time for work that is just incongruent. We have to be consistent in order to have sustainability in what we're doing.
It just reminds me of what was said to me yesterday, a reminder. Every day is an election, depending on how you move your body and what you do with it. And I do think we need a moment of dissonance and a moment of reckoning and a moment of self-examination. And then we're going to have to get up and we're going to have to do the work. And I deeply appreciate the work of Ubuntu and Sankofa and the examination of the past. I'm sitting here reflecting upon the organizing work and thinking about Marshall Ganz's story of self, story of us, and story of now. And I am constantly in a space when we have moments like this. And I was this immediately after 2016. What is my role? What is our role? How do I feel? How do we feel? And the question always that Marshall leaves with us, and if you're not familiar with Marshall Ganz's work, I encourage you to look at his work, is always the question of what is the story? Once we have self-examined the story of self and our own roles and our own responsibilities, and we have gathered together to form a collective story, the story of us, and the collective hope, if not the collective, like at times shame that especially those of us in white bodies and white cishet bodies need to have, then the story is Now, what do we do? And I think that would become the question of this. What do we do?
Yeah, Cody, as we close, I enjoy this conversation because it is a helpful way to process a myriad of complex and perplexed emotions and thoughts. What I hope that folks are taking away today in listening to this is that I encourage you, I implore you to find hope and to hold on to it. Um, our country has faced way more difficult challenges.
Yeah.
We have overcome so much, but it doesn't mean that in the overcoming that people weren't able to continue in the fight. We've lost people metaphorically and physically. People have trauma and harm. But I would be remiss if I did not encourage folks to find ways to have hope and to have peace. And one of the themes that we do when we talk to leaders and doing this work is we ask, how are you taking care of yourself? And so, Cody, as we close, one of the ways I'm going to take care of myself is the reduction that I have in engaging in social media and
Yeah.
news outlets for whatever time period is necessary. That is something
Mm-hmm.
I'm about to do. I am going to replace my desire and my curiosity about people's opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm going to replace it with just like something that's not just brings me joy, but something that like uses my body. So I've been thinking about, starting maybe some like yoga or Pilates or just maybe just collective walks with my daughter. Um, Maybe even some family Sunday dinners, those are
Yeah.
thinking back to the spaces that leadership and policy decisions and acts of harm against marginalized and minoritized communities cannot disrupt my memories of community. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back to my memories of community, my memories of joy, my focus on the things that when I'm by myself and I just have a hint of a memory that brings me a smile. And so that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on maybe recreating some things in a newer context, right? One of the things that you said is, what is the story of now? And my story of now is a reinvestment of my curiosity um, into more present day outcomes, things that are reflective of my commitment and my leadership. So I'm not gonna claim that I'm transformative, transformational, transactional, whatever. I'm just gonna just really just start being more for the people and focusing on the collective and creating collective spaces because honestly, community brings me joy. So that's going to be the way that I have self-care. How are you going to be taking care of yourself, Cody?
I appreciate this as a sort of closing sort of piece for us. I too also want to sort of think about sort of focusing on the body and the health of the body for myself. I really want to reinvest in community as a person who admits they overwork. I think part of what I need is to spend more time hosting meals and, dare I say, breaking bread together with folks, and not the religious overtone on it, but to be in that space, breaking bread and collective community and hard conversations. And I think that might be a sort of first step for me, is to sort of reinvest in self, reinvest in community. The other night I bought plane tickets to DC for the inauguration in the hope that things would go differently. And this morning my printer said, well, we can cancel those tickets. And I said, we need to see what's going to happen. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, there might be a march that we need to show up to. And she said, I'm tired of marching. And my response to her was, cannot grow tired. That is how we lose. We must stay refreshed, hopeful.
This is a good note to pause on. So we appreciate you all for listening. We leave you with that there is some joy that can still be present in this. We encourage you to be hopeful, take care of yourself, and do some reflection about how are you approaching the work in this moment. And how are you doing the work with folks? And what is it that you're actually working to dismantle?
That wraps up today's episode of After Further Consideration. We hope our conversation has sparked new ideas and provided valuable insights for your own work in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion on your campus and beyond.
Thank you for listening in. Remember, fostering meaningful change is a journey. Be encouraged and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in creating a more inclusive educational environment. After Further Consideration is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too.
Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional.
Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from Brian Piper, Allison Tercio, Eddie Francis, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed.
Enrollify is presented by Element 451. The next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.